I think the most common ethical dilemma is about protecting the source. We want to tell people stories, and we want to give a full accounting of what's happening to them. But at the same time, AIDS is tremendously stigmatized as a disease, and people react very harshly. So when we report the story, I think the first thing we have to pay attention to on a daily basis, and it really is an ethical problem, is to do no harm, like in biomedical ethics. First, do no harm.
A big problem is just getting people to go on the record. They will tell you their stories, but they don't want their names in the paper because they don't want their neighbors to see and they don't want anyone to know. So that's been a big problem. And I thought, okay, covering it as long as I have now for more than a year, that people would be more willing to be on the record. But I suppose their reality is what it is, and they just don't want anyone to know.
And is it sometimes a question in your own mind how far to push? It's in your interest as a reporter to get them to agree to be identified. It may not be in their interest, clearly.
It sometimes is not in their interest, and sometimes you leave a discussion thinking, if I put that in the story, that could potentially harm them. So if I have a question about that, I don't put that in the story. I think if this, you have to have your own code of personal ethics of how to deal with that. In the decision not to be public, sometimes it's very clear. They have very good reasons for not doing it. I then, though, will explain why I'm doing the story, what the audience is, who would see the story.
The story has to get out there for society to really understand the complexities of tackling HIV. But to do so, there's a lot of things reporters can do. It's really interacting with people that they're talking to, being very clear up front what the story is going to be about, what the parameters are. If there's a camera person involved, really understanding what the community that they're working in, what the individual that they're working with is comfortable with, and respecting that. Because if that boundary is crossed, it not only will cut off further opportunities for stories in the future, but the serious implications that someone could face in their community, are really should be the driving force here.
In the effort to get the story, we forget that these are real people. When we turn the camera off or we close our notebooks and we leave, they have to live the rest of their lives. So yes, there have been situations where I've convinced someone only when I knew it was absolutely going to be safe for them, and that by them telling the story, they would really help other people.
If someone ultimately chooses not to want to be identified in the piece that you're writing, how do you shield their identity and yet still report on their experiences?
That's it's a very difficult situation, and I try to learn from them. So I will talk to them about whatever the topic that I'm covering and spend time understanding what it is, so I have a further depth of understanding. But I generally do not use pseudonyms or use a full experience of someone who isn't willing to come public. I then will use that information to go try to find someone who will go public. So if it's an extreme situation, if there have been an extreme situation in the history of AIDS, there have been people who have been infected through various means, through blood transfusions or hemophilia, children, where obviously their identities have to be protected, especially it's been the case in the United States quite a bit.
I just did an interview with a woman in shadow, one of the very few shadow interviews I've ever done. And it wasn't because this woman was afraid for herself. It was for her daughter. And her daughter knows, and her daughter's fine and very supportive. But it was maybe not so much her daughter now when her daughter's 14, but it's when her daughter's older, and, protecting her in that way. And I honored it.
So the idea that people don't want to be identified is a very difficult question for reporters, because editors are very reluctant. They don't like printing stories about people who don't want their names used. But I'm very sympathetic to the patient, however. I believe that they have a right to their privacy, And I almost understand that until we get to the point where HIV and AIDS is accepted, generally, that they have a right to it. And it has to do with the patient's awareness of what their rights are. And that is, a lot of people in particularly developing countries where they're dependent upon the health facilities where they may be going for assistance don't know that they have a right to tell you that I don't want to talk to you because they're seeking help. The health facility is thinking funding, perhaps. And so your question is, I tend to kind of err on the side of they have a right to know, and I tell them, you have a right to tell me that you don't want your name used, you don't want to talk to me. No, it has nothing to do. It's almost like informed consent, which is an issue that people who are doing research understand. But I feel as a journalist, I also have that responsibility as well.
How important is the investment of time on your part in the people whose story you want to tell, as opposed to
Primary,
barging in to a room and saying, we want to interview you, let's do it?
I've seen both. They call it parachute journalism, as you know, where you sort of drop in from nowhere, and the journalist sticks a microphone in your face and says, how do you feel about that? Isn't it horrible? The investment of time is the most important thing to me. There are two parts of it. The time before, when you do your homework, when you find out as much as you can about the culture in which the person is living, what the norms are around these kinds of transmissible diseases. You just do as much homework. And now with the internet, it's much, much easier than it used to be. You can find out just about anything you want to know. And then there's the investment of time with the person. And that is, there's no substitute for face-to-face. Unfortunately, budgets are so tight that you have shortened time for your homework or your pre-research and shortened time for work on the ground. Very often you have to do the research and then do the interview within days of each other. So you don't have time to really work on those relationships. And in that case, what I do is work on relationships long distance with people who are trusted in the community. So maybe it's the head of the AIDS service organization, or it's the principal of the school, or whoever the kind of opinion leaders are of that area.
I'd go to meetings, I'd go to the state conference, I'd go hang around with people in the community organizations. So I would start seeing people, in 10 different places. And so everyone would get to know me, and then they'd realize, okay, if there's an HIV/AIDS meeting in the health department, I'm going to be there, or if there's a task force meeting, I'm going to be there. And then I would write stories at particular times when different developments came up. And so they sort of then began to expect that I would do it. But I was doing it anyway, so.
Have you ever acted as a kind of go-between between a reporter and someone who is HIV positive and may have some hesitancy about talking to that reporter?
Right. That's a very good question. I would not just put two people together, the subject and a reporter, if I didn't feel like that reporter, after I've talked to them, was sensitive to the issues at hand. So I would want to discuss with the reporter, do they understand, first of all, what's their motivation for the story? What are they trying to do? What are the general, who else are they talking to for that story? Do they understand the implications that their reporting could have, good and bad, for an individual, for a community, for a family? You can get a pretty good sense by talking to someone if they understand those things, or if they're willing to be educated about those things so that they can proceed.
In many places, I've also found that I can keep going and find someone who will go public and will understand what it means to go public. So I think it's very important in the long view, to erase stigma. And one way of erasing stigma is to have as many people go public about the disease as I possibly can find. When someone says that they're willing to go public, sometimes I go much further than just explaining where it's going to go. I say, you know, this is how I'm going to use the information that you gave me. And these are some of the things you should think about. Now that information can travel across the world on the web, and that means that even if you're in a remote area of the Congo, there is an internet cafe down the street, and there's a chance that someone in that cafe could see a story about you. Kind of remote chance. But you want to make sure that when the person talks about it, that they feel comfortable that in their own neighborhood, in their church or in their mosque, that their neighbors could know that they're positive. And that's generally people in Africa have been more open in revealing their status to a Western reporter. Because they don't think they think that they're still protected by it. And so it's been my job to talk to them more and more about whether that protection really exists for them.
As we move to online media, you can't say that something that you're covering for perhaps, being transmitted in the U.S., that's where it's only going to be seen or heard. If it's about someplace in Zambia, the Zambia media will pick it up and use it as well, and it goes global. And so even if it's some person in a village somewhere, you'd be surprised. They know about your work